Hey folks, it's Calvin. Um, I'm recording on my phone today because I want to compare the video and audio quality to my webcam. Today I want to talk about my first role-playing game experience. So I started playing back in 2021, just after COVID. A group of coworkers and I were on a work trip to Miami, and we decided to try Dungeons and Dragons together. There were 7 of us, and we were all brand new to the game. I ended up being the dungeon master, and I bought the physical core rule books and the Curse of Strahd adventure module. And once a week, we would all cram into my hotel room around a tiny little table and roll dice together. Back then, even though I was the most knowledgeable one at the table, I barely knew the rules, and I made a lot of bad calls. I had way too many players, and I was not equipped to wrangle them or to deal with problem behaviors. And I had no experience role-playing, and I was running a very role-play heavy module with an iconic villain. And I wish that I had taken the time to practice running the game, maybe do some one-shots before jumping headfirst into a campaign like that, because it ended up being a very unsatisfying experience, and it left me wanting to start over. So I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I take a lot of pride in what I do, and I put a lot of effort into doing a good job. And while I never got into the big D&D YouTube channels like Critical Role and whatnot, I did spend a lot of time watching other advice on YouTube and reading other advice on Reddit. In particular about the Curse of Strahd module. I tried to incorporate a lot of the ideas and tips that I found into my game, and I think I set expectations for myself way too high, especially given that none of us had ever done it before. And I tried really hard to get the rules right. And this led to huge delays because I would pick up my physical books and I would try to thumb through as quickly as possible to the exact rule I needed for the occasion. And then if I realized I did something wrong, I felt like I needed to retcon things. I would undo turns, and multiple turns even, up to the point of the mistake, and then try to have everything play from there after making the correction. Because knowing that the outcome would have been different had I got the rule right would get under my skin, and I wouldn't be able to let it go. So in that group, we had a druid, a ranger, a bard, a rogue, a barbarian, and a wizard in the party. And I tried my best to understand their character sheets at least as well as they did, because none of them none of them knew enough about the rules. Even with all that attention and effort, I still got a lot of rules wrong. In particular, I had one player, the ranger player, who anytime anything even remotely hostile was happening, he would say, "I ready my bow." And I would let him ready his bow. And the result of that was he ended up getting a free attack every time we rolled initiative. I let him get essentially a surprise round. And I didn't, because I didn't understand the rules for surprise, and it was because I didn't understand the rules for readied actions that was happening. And he was also using the optional rules from Tasha's, and so he had favored foe. And I misread the feature. I didn't realize that it was only supposed to happen once per turn, and I didn't realize that it used concentration. And similarly for Colossus Slayer, I didn't realize that was supposed to only happen once per turn. I was letting him get favored foe, Colossus Slayer, and Hunter's Mark on all of his attacks. And he was just obliterating everything that I put in front of him. And I don't think that I made players do concentration checks at all. Like, I just forgot about them. I didn't pay attention to spell components, verbal somatic material. I accidentally let my bard cast Hold Person on a night hag because I forgot about the creature type being fiend, and I forgot that the night hag has magic resistance, and I forgot that the night hag has counterspell, and it made an encounter which would have otherwise been really tense and really challenging very flat and disappointing. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we had an encounter with 6 vampire spawn that ended up lasting 7 hours. 7 hours in initiative. And it was exhausting, both mentally and physically. My players would ask hypothetical questions, and they'd test drive their turn of what would happen if I did this, and we ended up looking up a bunch of rules because, of course, I couldn't trust myself to make a ruling, and I wanted to get things right. And the players were cross-talking with each other and trying to give each other advice and strategize on what to do on the other person's turn. And while there were a few close calls and tense moments up until they finally clutched victory from the jaws of defeat, for the most part, that fight was just a slog. It was just numbing. And if we assume all things are equal, the 6 players against the 6 vampire spawn, how much of the 7-hour fight did each of those players actually get to control their character and do something? Maybe 30 minutes? It was a train wreck. So, out of the 6 players, the one player that actually put effort into his character was the druid. He came to us with, no exaggeration, a 20-minute long backstory where, because he had taken the time to actually do research about the lore of the Forgotten Realms, and he explained to us, starting with the cosmology and the creation myth of his race's religion, all the way up through his exile from his clan, his backstory. And the rest of us poked fun at him and laughed at him for being a big fucking nerd. And then when we actually started playing, he was the only one role-playing. He was the only one making decisions in character. And unfortunately, this ended up being disruptive because I had failed to set expectations, and I had failed to communicate the tone of the campaign. And so it wasn't anything that he was doing that was wrong. It's that the character that he made had motivations that were not consistent with the setting. The theme that I wanted to communicate, the tone that I wanted to communicate with the campaign was one of irredeemable evil, the struggle of good against irredeemable evil. And his character was very aloof and indifferent, just sort of neutral to everything. And so he didn't really have any reason to engage with any of the things that were being presented to him. So even though he was the only one to actually be role-playing, his character wasn't really a good fit. And he went on to continue playing that character, but he dramatically changed its personality. And then my ranger and bard players, they didn't really like each other at work. And their out of character disagreements began to bleed into the game. At one point during the campaign, the ranger sacrificed his pet rat to appease some evil spirits. And thereafter, anytime the ranger tried to interact with an NPC, the bard would come in and try to undermine him and chime in with, "Oh, he killed his pet rat. You shouldn't trust him. You know, he's a piece of shit." And there was no like in character reason for it. They just hated each other. I mean, I could understand if there was an in character reason, but it was just personal. And then these same 2 players would try to flirt with any female NPC that I put in front of them. And I was not about to engage with their flirtation in character. It was just annoying. The bard, cut it out, boy. The bard ended up metagaming. He had a friend who had played through the campaign and told him where Chew. Told him where a magic item was. And so just abruptly, for no in-character reason, the bard ventures off on his own, leaving the party behind, and just begins tinkering around, digging around in a certain location, and lo and behold, he finds a magic item and nearly gets killed in the process. My wizard and barbarian players both abruptly quit the game. The wizard was interested in a girl, and so that's understandable, I guess. The barbarian player, he was doing tattooing on the side, and so game nights were cutting into his business. And then the rogue player had to physically leave our table to attend a school, and we tried to keep him in the game, playing remotely, which I guess worked out, but there was a lot of technical issues. And then with those two players gone and one playing remotely, the ranger and the bard ended up interacting with each other more often, and their in-character and out-of-character differences started boiling over. I invited another player who ended up playing a paladin into the campaign to try to dilute the interactions between the two of them and to fill the void from the two players that had left. But the campaign only ended up going a little bit longer after that, because we returned home from Miami and people were with their families again, and I couldn't get them to re-engage. Back then, I didn't really understand roleplay, and based on the guidance and advice that I had found online, I felt like it was my job to weave a story for my players, and I tried to do things like incorporate backstories into the campaign, which for Curse of Strahd especially doesn't really make any fucking sense. For Curse of Strahd, you're supposed to be strangers in a strange land, and virtually nothing you encounter should be relevant to your backstory. I spent a lot of time planning for events that I hoped would happen in the game, and I prepared visuals. I wrote descriptions and dialogue. I even picked out dramatic music. And with all that preparation, I began to feel the urge to force certain outcomes to make sure that my players would get to see the cool thing I prepared for them. my recording cut out for some reason. Well, anyways, when it came time for the events that I planned to finally happen, my players were disengaged. They seemed bored and distracted, and they were looking at their phones and having side conversations, and they had asked me to repeat things because they weren't listening. And I realized it was just wasted effort. And that's when I started going down the rabbit hole, trying to figure out if I was even engaging with the hobby in the right way. Well, I think I'll end it here. And in the next video, talk about how I learned about RPG theory and how I was introduced to different groups of people that have a different philosophy of how to run and enjoy tabletop role-playing games, and different philosophy about what the role of the game master is. So, until next time.